I can't help but hear people coughing, and they're going to say it's the incense, it's making me cough. But it's not. It's just seeing it is making you cough. Because the incense itself, well, it's the charcoal maybe. The charcoal smell is a little strong. If you get right over it, then it'll, but the smell, it's the perfume. But it doesn't go out there. It stays up here. It goes up, it gets soaked into the ceiling tiles. It gets sucked up into the air conditioner. Which I don't know how we have a magical air conditioner here. The one in Athens was awful. If you didn't turn the front section off, completely, which we did in the summer, was awful, it would suck the smoke in to the air return, and then the detectors inside the ductwork would set off the fire alarm, and the fire truck would come, and it was, I'm surprised I've never set the fire alarm off here before. But you should have seen the confirmation mass yesterday with the Archbishop. He really uses a lot of incense. He actually went through 2 of the containers. Ryan told me before Mass, and normally it takes me 3 or 4 Masses to go through one of those. So he was really going. Also, he preached for 55 minutes. Yeah, I kid you not. So that's a long time. We're getting a third auxiliary bishop, though, in January, so hopefully the rotation will be the 3 auxiliary bishops for the next 3 years. They preach normal length, 15, 20 minutes. But so I don't ever want to hear complaints that Father Michael and I preach too long, because if you do, you're going to be sending it to the Archbishop anyway, who he preaches forever. Anyway, so today is the 3rd Sunday in Advent, known as Gaudete Sunday, and Gaudete means to rejoice or to be happy, right? For all my life, people have been telling me that I need to smile more. From school on, you need to smile more. It takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile. I'm not using any muscles to frown. My face is neutral. My mom told me that I inherited a particular face from her. There's I forget, what do you call that? Not the name of the face. No, the acronym, right? Yeah, the acronym. You know what I'm talking about. She said that I inherited that from her. Anyway, so I don't smile a lot unless I'm happy. Then I smile, right? There's reason to smile. People are always like, is something wrong with you? No, nothing's wrong with me. They go to Joanna's office, why doesn't Father smile more? Is he angry at us? No, he's not. He just doesn't smile. And Joanna has to come to me and say, people say that you need to smile more. I'll smile when I'm happy. When there's something exciting, then I smile, okay? The 3rd candle, the reason to smile, right? All the smoke, reason to smile. The fact that it's almost Christmas, reason to smile. And that's the real reason for Gaudete. It's almost Christmas, right? So I'm wearing what color? That's pink. That's salmon, or coral maybe. This is rose, right? What are those? Those are roses, and it's the same color-ish of rose. Father Michael gave me a hard time last night, and he said, no, the color of rose is what roses are, red roses, that deep color. I'm like, no, that's red. That's why we call them red roses. So anyway, important theological debates that we have. But the reason that we have rose, actually, the reason that we call it rose instead of pink is because we have words that come from both the Latin side and the Germanic side. And so pink is our kind of Germanic, and rose is the one that kind of comes from Italian, Spanish, all those Romance languages. Rosa means pink, right? But we're no, there's a difference between pink and rose, okay? Pink is this effeminate, or not necessarily effeminate. If you're, in a Southern fraternity, you can get away with it. Whereas rose is different. Rose is more stately, and, men can wear it, and it's okay. But they're really the same word. So we have the rose color, though, because it's kind of a combination of the violet and white, right? So it lightens the violet, which is a penitential color. It lightens it and puts a little bit of joy to it because it's almost Christmas. Actually, it's halfway through Advent. We get 4 full weeks of Advent this year because Christmas falls on a Sunday. So we're halfway through the Advent season, halfway to Christmas. And so we pause and we rejoice, right? We heard it in in Isaiah. We also heard it in James talking about rejoicing. What was it exactly that James said? Some people have photographic memory. I don't. Isaiah says that the parched land and the desert will exult, and James says, actually, James doesn't really talk about rejoicing. There was something else I wanted to say that James said. He said, what? He says to be patient. Okay, so we're waiting. Advent, patience. Isaiah, rejoice. James, be patient. Be patient with joy, though, right? A lot of times when we're waiting for something, we can be annoying, right? Like when Father Michael's waiting for the Amazon deliveries to come, he's like antsy, and he's like, they're three deliveries away, and then he's like, they missed the U-turn, because delivery drivers always do that. They miss that U-turn. But when we're waiting, we should be waiting with joyful expectation, right? So we're waiting for Christmas, we ought to be joyful. But ultimately, Advent is not about us waiting for Christmas, as we've said. Advent is about us waiting for the return of the Lord. Advent is about waiting for the second coming. And so we must wait patiently with joy for the second coming of Jesus Christ. What does that look like, right? A lot of times people kind of associate Christians, Catholics in particular, with kind of being gloomy, and we talk about sin and we talk about suffering and things like that. And so we're think of like the Monty Python knights or monks that are walking and hitting themselves in the head with the Bible or plaque or whatever it was. We think of just like it's sad to be Catholic, like, oh, I got to do all this stuff. I had to go to church earlier this week on Thursday for Immaculate Conception and just all this stuff I got to do. But in reality, all that stuff ought to lead us to joy if we think about it, right? We think about what real joy is, not what the joy that, the world tells us is, but actual joy of doing the will of God, actual joy of recognizing that we're growing in holiness, actual joy of striving to be a good person, that kind of joy. And so we ask ourselves, am I a joyous person? Am I joyously awaiting the coming of Christ or not? If we look at the church kind of as an example, the church is a reason for joy, right? Here's the church, this 2,000-year-old institution that was instituted by Christ, that through all the attempts of the priests and bishops and popes to try to ruin it, it still hasn't happened. It still exists, right? Compare that to our country. We're not yet 300 years old, and there's all sorts of things that, like, oh, the Constitution meant that, or it meant this, or, and it's like, okay, how much longer is this going to work? But the church has been solid, right? The church is a source for joy in the world, because ultimately it reminds us and it points us toward God. It reminds us of the importance of following God. It redirects our gaze. Even though sometimes there's difficulties, even though sometimes there's scandal, but ultimately the church reminds us and points us back to God. All sorts of other institutions have come and gone throughout the last 2,000 years, but the church remains. So the church is really this kind of source of joy for us, to live our lives with joy, to live our lives waiting for the coming of God. John the Baptist, here he is in prison, and prison in Palestine was like a hole in the ground. It probably still is, actually, but it wasn't a comfortable place to be in. It was probably dark, and there were probably other people there that were like actual criminals. And here he is, and he calls his disciples. He's like, hey, I hear there's this guy, and is he saying these things? And is it the one? Is it the one we've been waiting for? And so they go and they ask Jesus, right, are you the Messiah? And Jesus answers by basically quoting Isaiah. He says, go and tell John what you hear and see, that the blind regain their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news proclaimed to them. And blessed is the one who takes no offense at me. And so they go back to John, and they tell him, John's in prison. It's a nasty, smelly prison. It's a hole in the ground. There probably wasn't like anywhere to go to the bathroom except in the hole in the ground. And they come back and they tell John the Baptist that Jesus has begun his ministry, and he's happy, he's joyous. Like, okay, good, the Messiah is here. and he's doing the Messiah stuff. Even though I'm in prison, I'm happy, right? For us, we're not waiting for Christmas so much because Christmas already happened. Christ was already born. Christ already took on our flesh. He already became incarnate. Fast forward to the end. He was crucified, died for our sins, rose from the dead, ascended gloriously into heaven, where he sits triumphantly as the King of the universe. And so we know the end of the story. So we don't have to wait to find out what happens. We just have to wait for it to happen to us. So in our suffering, can we be joyous? In our suffering, in our longing, in our perhaps lack of patience, can we have reason for joy? This is a weird thing, right? The world tells us, no, suffering's bad. Don't be happy about suffering. Reject it at all costs. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And then Christians, we say, no, because from suffering came the best thing that could ever happen, salvation. And so in my suffering, I know that there's an end to it. I know it won't go on forever, unless I choose to separate myself from God, in which case it will go on for eternity. But I know that there's an end to the darkness. I know that there's an end to the suffering. I know that the lame will walk, that the blind will see, that the deaf will hear. I know that because God told me that. Because God's told all of us that. He's revealed that to us so that indeed we may be able to have joy. So we shouldn't walk around all gloomy and like, oh, our life's so hard and we have to suffer and we have to be penitential and we got to do everything and be sad and yeah, we have to be penitential, we have to be repentant, certainly, but that doesn't mean that we have to be like gloomy, right? Kind of taking a balance of kind of the recognizing the hardship of life, recognizing the suffering, but also being able to intersperse some joy with that, right? Being able to sprinkle in some funny stories about cats or whatever with that. To be able to have a reason for joy. A reason for joy. If all of us reflect in our lives and say, what is my reason for joy? And Jesus Christ isn't the main reason, something is out of whack. Something's out of order, right? If the reason for my joy is money, if the reason for my joy is pleasure, if the reason for my joy is prestige, the reason for my joy is power, something's out of whack. The reason for our joy has to be Jesus Christ. It has to be Him and Him alone. And so, as we prepare ourselves for Christmas, where we're going to be joyous, right? We're going to be happy. We get to eat the good food and have the presents and everything and see people and celebrate and have parties. As we prepare for that, let us recognize that our whole life is really like one Gaudete Sunday, right? We could say it's an Advent, but let's say it's just one Gaudete Sunday. It's just this one day where we find ourselves kind of in the midst of a penitential time, but where we're called to be joyous, where we're called to smile, where we're given reason to smile, right? Where when we reflect on the teachings of Jesus Christ, we recognize that that is an opportunity for us to be happy. It's not a burden, it's not a difficulty, it's not a complication, but it's a reason for us to be happy, right? So as we continue with this Advent season, these remaining 2 weeks, as we continue with this Holy Mass, let us reflect on the ways in which Jesus has revealed Himself to us and the ways that that ought to evoke joy in our lives so that we as well may evoke joy in the lives of those whom we encounter.